What's good? Dude, I had a question before you go. I kind of know what the problem is.
What are you talking about, Barney?
Look, I was thinking about it, and then I looked down and I saw your shits. I had to ask you, what are those?
What's wrong with them?
What's wrong with them? You got on the Benjamin Franklin Civil War loafers, penny loafer, no penny having 1920s hobo looking road circuit security shoes, and you thought I was finna let your socks slide, my G. Your socks look depressed, bro. You don't have the calf muscles to keep your shits up your leg, my guy. You took the socks and the shoes together out the lost and found, bro. Go put them shits back, dog. But I got something for you, my guy. Here you go. If these shits is fresh, you'll be able to hit the dance floor and cut the rug up. Something like this, my guy. Peep this shit. You're going to be out there doing this shit right here, my guy. Let's go. Shake that butt. You feel me? Get that shit a try. Get down, shake that. Look at that. You got this shit.
I did it. Did you see?
You certainly did.
It was easy with my...
What are those?
What happened to my dancing shoes?
No, some real shit, my G. I needed them shits back.
So you asked if I'd ever read Jane Austen, and I read Sense and Sensibility, but I remember in grad school, Jane Austen became the subject of interest during those Foucauldian times. My paper that actually got published was jumping off of what a lot of people were saying about Jane Austen. Their whole point is, well, at least what they were trying to say for a little while. This was when I was young and I didn't even understand the depth of the author stuff that they were going on with, because I was always wondering, like, how can you guys just go around making these claims that the person meant this or tried to do this and you don't have anything really to back it up? But what they were pushing really hard, and Jane Austen was kind of person number one for this, is saying that anything in olden times was so borne down upon by the hegemony. Every part of the story was the first act and the second act, or the real message. In the third act, when they wrap it all up, like all the women get married, or the state arrests the naughty person or whatever.
Yeah, that's for audience sake.
Yeah, it's for audience sake, but they would claim it was for the
to please the powers that be. Yeah,
to please the powers and all that stuff. But the real message was the feminism of the first couple acts and the brazen spirit.
Although she is now often recruited by feminist critics to make points about women's limited life choices, preeminent social satirist Jane Austen wrote to oppose the popular proto-feminist ideas of her time, and her warnings about romantic self-indulgence remain highly relevant to our own. I'm Janice Fiamingo, and this is the Fiamingo File 2.0. British novelist Jane Austen, reputed to have given the novel its modern form, is sometimes mischaracterized as a writer of quietly rebellious women's fiction. Beneath her conventional romance formulas, Austen is thought to have been angrily aware of female dependency and of her society's many restrictions on women's freedom and self-determination. And while it is true that Austen's happy endings quite often seem fragile and tenuously achieved, and while many of her heroines indeed face loneliness and limitation, Austen was emphatically not a proto-feminist promoting female grievance or rebellion. In particular, Austen deeply distrusted her era's emphasis on intense feeling as the ground of morality, an emphasis which placed a sympathetic focus on women as more capable, allegedly, than men of experiencing and expressing emotion. While Austen readily acknowledged that feeling was central to family life and social benevolence, she was acutely aware that unregulated feeling was not only dangerous for individuals, destructive of their happiness, but destructive also of social functioning. In this video, I will look briefly at two of Austen's novels to analyze their implicit commentary on the need to control feeling and to distinguish committed love from emotional indulgence. Alas, the analysis will necessarily involve some simplification of Austen's subtle and endlessly complex works. Like most conservative moralists, Austen believed that suffering was an irresolvable human constant that emotional self-indulgence couldn't assuage. For her, living well meant finding a framework of meaning and consolation for pain. The notion that one sex had a monopoly on right feeling was for her the height of self-flattering folly. Remember that Anne said, quote, "I should deserve utter contempt if I dared to suppose that true attachment and constancy were known only by woman." This was a clear rebuke of proto-feminist ideology by Austen, who recognized the temptation in the women of her day to believe themselves uniquely put upon and morally superior. Austen would well have understood how easily we arrived at our present moment of feminine self-indulgence.
So they go through all these old different books and stuff and try to like poke it out. And that the paper I got published was about the Trickster of Seville, although I think it was in Spanish. But yeah, so I'm technically published in the James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian realm, a trickster.
Wow,
but even,
you're an expert.
Yeah. It wasn't just one of those bull crap library things that go straight to library and nobody ever reads them again. The only time it will ever come up is like back then when I was writing stuff, and this is so long ago, when I was writing stuff, the hardest thing to do was find something that somebody else didn't already do it on, in the sense of somebody gets the idea of this thing of the three acts and the first two count and the last one doesn't. Somebody spreads that idea out and you cannot believe the amount of papers from just random, master students and grad students that just pump those out because it's like a quick blueprint to pump out the paper. It's kind of like finding out you can call anything racist and just doing that. And so they'll pump them out so fast that you have to go through these databases. The databases of all these other places, and you just kind of have to find one that nobody else has written one about quite yet. And so it's almost kind of like a factory. It's just a factory, though. That's why I used to try to say, like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian and all those guys, way before they'd read any of the stuff, I'd already read like a lot of the primary works. But at this point, I haven't read anywhere near as much of the primary critical theory as James Lindsay has because he just pumps through it. But I promise I've read more crap downstream papers than most of the type of stuff that the universities produce that's just straight. It really is a factory. I can't even describe the factory. I can't even describe the databases of all these things that they put them in a journal, like the one I'm published in. It was like called Confutati or something like that. They put it in a journal. They sell that journal to the library. That library goes into the database, and then it's just gone forever. And it's that type of stuff that you know how they say like most professors or most people who have degrees never get cited. It's because those papers get put down that memory hole. And if they get cited, it's only because somebody else is trying to kind of write the same paper just to have a new paper or something like that. And so they might reference or cite you and say, hey, I noticed that so-and-so wrote about this. But it's never like a citation about Foucault's ideas or Ibsen's ideas or something like that. It's just referencing like, hey, I noticed somebody else wrote about this. That's why I joke it's kind of like academically, it's kind of a nightmare of a paper to say, if you just want to write some paper, the Beatles were actually misogynist and white supremacists. It seems like an easy thing, and it is a dumb easy thing. But what I mean, what isn't easy is that you have to pay deference to everybody else who already said it. And that's the nightmare of research that you have to do. So you have to look at everybody who ever said and act like you read the paper of everybody who ever said, oh, the Beatles were actually racist. Oh, the Beatles were, and that's just a drove. It's just an avalanche of crap. And you have to sit and read them. And you're probably the only person in the world reading through them because nobody ever actually read the article. Take this Banjo off.
So you just want to hear about how dumb I am?
What's that?
Okay, well, I found out just now. When I was like first learning to play guitar, I realized that I enjoyed finger picking a lot more than, using just a pick. And so I went to Chesbro's and I bought a set of those finger picks because I was like, I like the feel of finger picking, but I want it to be louder and I can't grow my nails out. I've tried it. It doesn't work. I just break them every time.
I'm going to guess. You wore them like this.
I did. I did, and I
because I did too.
I was like, why the fuck would anybody use these? How could you possibly get fast with these? You're going against the grain. Like, maybe if you're trying to do some weird like bass pop and
Well, that doesn't make sense because
Pop
it
is
seems
flat.
like it would make sense to have them like a nail.
I know.
Like it's your actual nail. And I actually
And so I
played for a
immediately
while.
threw them away. I immediately
Oh,
just threw
really?
them away. And well, I didn't throw them away. I still actually have them. I have never used them in the last like 15 years. And now I'm like, oh, why didn't I even consider that? Because the same thing happened to me when the first time I ever played a Strat. I'm playing my friend's Strat, and I'm like, I really like the tone of this guitar. I like everything about it, but this damn knob is like the volume knob. My hand keeps bumping up against it when I play. It's like, why the fuck would these idiots put the volume knob right there, right where I'm going? And I'm sitting there like going off on the placement of this volume knob. And then I realized how stupid I sound. I was like, okay.
Yeah,
You're a 15-year-old kid who's been playing guitar for like a month, and you think that like the most iconic guitar design of all time, you think that you could have done it better. Like, this is where Jordan Peterson comes in and tells you, oh, you just think you have all the information, huh? That's not the case, bucko. And tells me that, like, oh, you know what? Maybe people who are better at guitar than you put their pinky under that knob and change their volume mid-playing. I don't know. There's like a million different things it could be, but I thought that I was so smart.
And then if you get used to that,
the developer of the Strat,
you get used to that, and if that volume knob is on a different place, you start getting real frustrated. It's, oh, why is it all the way over there? And I can't sit there and do this stuff because it takes it away from your chance to just do it in the middle of playing. I never really had the problem of ever hitting it, although I've never played. I mean, I have a Strat now. I didn't start off on Strats. I didn't start playing Strat until after years and years and years of playing on a Les Paul, an Epiphone. I had an Epiphone that used to be Flips, and I bought it off Flip. That was an exact replica of John Lennon's guitar. Just made it the same, and even like somebody took it and reconfigured it the same way that he liked it. It was pretty nice. You wouldn't guess that you're supposed to put them like that, and I even did it the wrong way for a while too. And the only thing that was, I actually got pretty good at it because I just said, oh, I'm going to just force down and do it because if somebody's doing it, I'm doing it. And I got okay at it. But the problem is, like, when they were on the other side, they'd shoot off. They'd flip off my finger. Then finally somebody told me, like, you have those on backwards. I was like, oh, gosh. I started doing it the other way. And it doesn't really make a ton of sense that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that that's so intuitive that you'd put it on your finger like that to play with.
Well, you think it just goes over your fingernail because, like, if I had longer,
because it looks like
that, but
yeah, it looks like a fingernail. Yeah,
just the unbridled arrogance of like 16-year-old me, just throwing it away and thinking everyone who uses these are stupid.
I still don't love it for guitar. I'll play it with banjo, and I almost can't play the banjo without them now. But it took a while to get used to it, and because I think banjo would have been a much quicker learn because the strings and just how the chords are formed is all pretty easy. But the big learning curve was forcing myself to get used to these. And there's still weird stuff. Like, the thing that blows my mind is, like, you have this thumb pick, this little part right here. Like, strings get caught in it, and I'm always like, how get the string caught in there? It drives me insane. And then sometimes, like, I can play all day, and I play with my band a couple songs live on the banjo, and I don't know what the hell it is, but like, I can play on these all night, and whenever I play live, they start shooting off, and I don't know why. It's maybe I'm just plucking harder because it's the live situation or something like that. But there's a flip. We were talking about finger picks. You ever use finger picks?
I mean, I've dabbled with them, but I've never like actually learned how to use them.
Did you know the right? Both Jared and I put them on the wrong way at first. Did you know the right way from the start?
I don't know. I have no idea.
So the right way is this way.
Oh yeah, I did them backwards.
Yeah, I found that out like just now when I saw him playing his banjo. I was like, oh fuck, I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I can't figure this out.
I played for a good 6 months like this, and I actually got pretty good at it. I actually probably even could have stayed good at it, but the reason I said, oh, that makes sense switching over is because they'd shoot off my finger this way real easy. I couldn't keep them on.
You'd really get real twang on that.
So we've already talked about Jane Austen. It's already recorded. Jane Austen and the thing where they pretend like the first couple acts of those old writings were the true message, and the final act was just them conforming for the hegemony. Then we got into finger picks and all that sort of stuff. You got Kitty there. I got my doggy here. So what's the topics? I was listening to a Jane Austen thing. I guess there was a Jane Austen film or Netflix show called Persuasion, which I guess was her last book. And I was just listening to, somebody said it failed or something like that. I never even heard it. I didn't hear it come and go, and I was only halfway through the thing. And I'm guessing I know why it failed, but I don't know.
I've never consumed Jane Austen other than as a background, because it's one of those perennial things, you know, like there's always some new production of Jane Austen being done. But I've never read it, watched it, cared about it.
I think I just generally don't trust adaptations of classics, because I went back and I watched the 2012 version of Anna Karenina, and I hated it. Like, it was just,
Really?
they try to do this weird creative thing, and the book is very somber. Like, it starts out, there's an affair that's happened, and Anna is trying to console the woman who was cheated on and fix the marriage, and that's played off in the movie as like a joke. Like, you're supposed to laugh that this guy cheated on his wife, and you can do that in certain, but that's not what it was in the book. And for some reason they've typecast Keira Knightley as being that Victorian and I don't like her that much. I can't get into, anyway.
Yeah. So this is the paper that I wrote. I basically copied that paradigm that people were writing about, of saying the first two acts are what count, and the third act was just trying to appease the hegemony, because the people back then couldn't stay on the radical message. They had to always, the third act where they got their comeuppance. So this story, The Trickster of Seville, is about like a playboy who just ran around, getting around with women and all that sort of stuff. And by the third act, it goes to hell, right? And I took that same sort of line that people took with Jane Austen and saying, no, the first two acts are what is counting. Let's read this carefully, because we can see that their real intention is just not to reinforce the hegemony. The real intent is to spread the message of sneakiness and naughtiness and antinomian behavior, or whatever. I think what I wrote and said, it all came from Foucault. I mentioned Foucault. This is published and in a stupid library at the U. And I think I was full of crap. Somebody called it the Playboy. And I think I was full of shit. Like it was totally like those death of authors. Even at that time, I was a young kid, and I was like, how can we go around saying that we know that they meant to do this? And like, shut up and do it. And
That's like the whole interpretation that Dan Maclellan video he did about how people are shipping Bible characters now, and Jonathan and David were now lovers rather than just like really good friends. There's no really good friends to this group of people. You can't be like, they're ruining male relationships because you can't have one without them thinking, wait a minute, are you fucking?
Sam and Frodo were for sure gay, and there's that channel that I showed you guys. I think it's called Is It Gay or something like that.
Oh yeah.
The guy goes through and says basically any sort of monster character is coded as gay because they're secret underneath, and so if you have like a mermaid, the Little Mermaid situation or anything, that's all gay coding because you're the hidden monster or something like that. This stuff I even knew. I remember when I was given, I had to, because I got accepted in this journal I was explaining to Jared that they get published and sent off to these libraries to never go anywhere. But there's millions and millions and millions and millions more papers of these just kind of crap downstream things of Foucauldian writing every single thing in history. People couldn't even start to stack them. And that's the work that they have every little ideologue sitting there learning to do across decades now in the humanities. And they really push you to do this. And they say you're supposed to write all of your papers through some sort of lens where you're viewing it this way. And they steer you to that, and you're a teen kid. And especially at that time, I didn't know, what are these lenses? I'm supposed to use these lenses. What are you talking about? And I just did it, and I regurgitated it. And I remember I had to go to the conference and talk about it live because it got accepted into this journal. And when I talked about it live, I was sitting there describing it and telling it. And I could see the look on all the professors' faces, they were all like, what? And that's how we look at them when they gave their papers too, because it's just like a long stream of what, and everybody's just getting up and dropping all these Foucauldian craps, and it was less known at the time. Maybe they'd sit there and and give jazz hands more nowadays. But it was crap. Like I knew I was spouting crap. I'm like, I just pulled this out of my ass. This is out of my ass. I'm published out of my ass. That's why I don't go around bragging that I'm technically published or something like that. Use the word published. It's such a load of shit.
Why don't you brag about it?
It was such.
It's an achievement, right?
but for a few years after that, I would go around, and what I noticed is at that time BYU's humanities department hadn't been ransacked yet. It is now, and I met several different women who came out of BYU's English department, and they all loved Jane Austen. Like BYU's English department was Jane Austen loving, but they loved it genuinely. Like they loved it honestly for like the story that it was, if that makes any sense. And I remember I used to pull the rug out from under them, describing them this bull crap of, the real message is the first two things, and that thing where you think there's a romantic ending where they get together, that was just a lie. And I'd go kind of throwing rain on their parade, where they'd all just, I think it was really popular with Mormon women because it just, I don't know, something about that Victorian era and the love stories of them. They were crazy about them for a while, but I'm sure they get the Foucauldian readings all the time now at BYU, I'm guessing. But,
probably.
What was the other thing that you were just talking about? You just said, you brought up Dan McClellan. Did you guys watch that Dan McClellan ripoff that I sent?
No.
Oh, no, I didn't. I forgot to click on that.
Watch it. I'll click on it now so you can watch it. And I think the thing that's stinky about it is I think it's like starting to become, I don't know, like a TikTok style. Yeah.
Some people can decide like what's outdated and what's not, but other people can't. Like I can't look at the Bible and use my best judgment and say I think that this is outdated, like stuff about gay people or whatever.
When we talk about the Torah or the books of law in the Old Testament, biblical scholars understand that there's three categories of laws. There's ceremonial, civil, and moral laws. The civil and ceremonial laws were for Israel in that time and context.
Hey everybody, Biblical Scholar here. We identify no such categories of law in the Hebrew Bible. Neither did ancient Israelites, neither did early Judaism. These categories were invented by Christians in the 2nd and 3rd century. Once they decided they were going to hold on to the Hebrew Bible as scripture, they had to come up with a rationalization for why only some of the laws were going to continue to be authoritative and others were going to be abandoned. And initially they came up with the ceremonial moral division, and then the civic one was added later. But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics, which is exactly how this creator is deploying it today.
Let me see if I can pull it up here. Ugh.
The archetype of the smarter than you.
Okay, I got it. Can you hear it?
Welcome to the series Superhero ACAB. Where
Are you hearing it?
Yeah, I heard ACAB.
Series Superhero ACAB, where we decide whether or not your favorite superhero is actually just a glorified cop and therefore does not deserve your adoration. These are based entirely on our opinions, so if you disagree, get in the comments.
Hi, my name is Dr. Cruz. I'm a comic scholar that specializes in superhero narratives. Let's see what you got.
It will be.
Was that a joke?
No, this is real. This is real.
He's not joking.
It's real, but he's making a joke, but it's real.
He did that. Let's see what you got.
Just like I said, there's bull crap all over those universities now. He really is a professor of American comics. But he doesn't put his he puts his figurines in the background, not his.
I'm going to put together a petition, and on that petition, I'm going to get a list of things that should not be allowed to be college majors, and I think comic books should be one of them.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at the first Avenger himself, Captain Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, aka America's ass. One quick caveat.
One thing that's interesting about it is like I'm only really criticizing this guy because he uses the Dan McClellan style, but he's actually going after these leftist kids who are just trying to call all superheroes, all cops are bastards, But he's still just using the Dan McClellan. I mean, you'll see.
Before we start, for the purposes of brevity, we will only be considering Captain America from the MCU. If you don't like that, get in the comment.
All right, so off the bat, we're deciding what data we are and are not considering, and I appreciate from a pragmatic perspective wanting to keep it limited to just these films. However, I do think it's a bad idea to exclude the original source material, seeing as these films are distillations of those original narratives that have clearly informed the text. That being said, let's continue.
Well, this may look...
This is exhausting.
It's such a copy of it. It's like he even copies the mannerisms and everything.
It really is.
Like an Easy case of ACAB fever. We think it's a little more complicated than that, and for that reason, we'll be ranking Captain America separately in the first 3 phases of the MCU. Phase 1 Captain America absolutely falls under the umbrella of ACAB. The man was born on the 4th of July in like the 1920s or 30s. If that doesn't scream, I believe in protecting the white middle-class American dream, I don't know what does.
He fought
so off the bat,
Nazis.
we should note that Steve Rogers was
He punched
this guy-
Hitler in the face in the comics.
This guy's actually taking him down, but then he's doing it in the Dan McClellan style that makes me want to barf.
He sacrificed his life to kill Mega Hitler in that first movie.
Yeah.
He was born on July 4th, 1918, according to the MCU Wiki. Now, on to your next point about him clearly representing the white middle-class American dream, I actually don't think that's as plausible a reading as you are suggesting. The truth is, we just don't have much biographical information about Steve's early life, outside of the fact that we can infer that he grew up in a working-class neighborhood in New York City. But if we were to speculate based off of the...
He's definitely not low class, or I mean middle class. Like, he's protecting a white middle class way of life. Like he talks in the movie about how he used to wear bread bags as shoes, and people would beat the shit out of him every day because he was tiny.
Is he in Brooklyn or
like if anybody is? He was Bronx, I think, but if anybody was marginalized or if anybody was being outcast, it's Steve Rogers. Are you fucking kidding me?
He's a skinny, beat up, poor kid. Yeah.
Available biographical data, such as his birth date, his military service, and
the way he uses like data, and he'll use the word. He'll drop
he bears the mantle of Captain America. Then we actually might come to a different conclusion. Besides him being a defender of the white middle class American dream. Specifically, that he represents a transcendent symbol of the American dream, a more equitable vision of America that has not yet been realized.
He's equitable.
Equitable.
Kind of like how in the Declaration of Independence, it says that all men are created.
So instead of like pushing back on these guys and saying like, shut up about your ACAB stuff, he's just going to go and say, he's actually a good guy leftist in his bullcrap way.
Equal, even though that was not the material reality. That's the purpose of Captain America. He's an ideal to remind us of that promise, that vision of what we could be.
He is 100% the kind of boomer who unironically and unapologetically refers to it as the greatest generation and throws a Karen-style tantrum in a Walmart parking lot if anyone refuses to do the same.
If you're looking for a Karen, Tony Stark is more your speed. Steve Rogers is notoriously level-headed.
The most damning evidence of ACAB mania comes in the first Avengers movie. During the Battle of New York, even though he has Tony Stark on his side, who could hack every phone in the city and warn every person of the incoming alien invasion, Captain America asks a cop for help.
So the critique here is that rather than go full tilt patriot,
he's like, why don't you? Wait, how do you? Can he hack? Does Tony Stark have the ability to just hack into every single phone?
It's the modern era, Flip. It found me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, because this is such a fascinating thing, but like that there's these two communists complaining about comic books. It's just like, oh my god. And then here's this guy, he's got a PhD in this bullshit. And he's here to say, he's like you say, like, I can't.
He's mimicking this local Mormon guy that is gotten
really
famous doing this stupid style of.
There's nothing saying
like,
about this.
Did Dan McClellan originate it? I doubt it. I'm sure there's probably a whole genre of hi, I'm smart.
No,
here's
it says no. I found the comment section that says, "Boy, I love Dan McClellan," and he says, "I hope Dan McClellan doesn't find one of my things." And I think I sent it to you guys.
So he's actually aping.
He's aping Dan McClellan, and I think more people are going to ape McClellan. They're going to say, "Hey, I'm going to go on TikTok and do this super pedantic professor to all these people making these."
And this will
videos.
be the new knockdown. It'll be look.
What an innovator!
Because I'm basically on Professor's side on most of this stuff.
Yeah,
he seems to be pretty solid about it, and he's shooting these dumb kids down. But also, this is just stupid. Because it's like, we don't need to talk like this to these kids. You just say, jackass. No, you're wrong. Like, there was
that's a stupid
white middle class thing that you're talking about. Never existed. It's a fantasy in your mind. It's not real.
Well, plus that critique they gave of what they should have done instead was the cringiest form of TV hacking that you could possibly think of. Oh, why didn't you just hack into all their phones and warn them? It's like, I don't know. Why didn't he hack into the alien ships and just disable them? If he can just hack anything in the world, just hack.
I mean, I don't even know the fucking comics, but I know nobody ever read Captain America and was like, oh, I need to exclude people that are non-white. That's the message I'm getting. It's like, no, Captain America has always been about the grandest American values. And, part of what makes Captain America a comic book is that in Captain America, America lives up to its values in a way that in reality it never does. But also, obviously everything's exaggerated. But yeah, like this whole idea that this is supposed to be some kind of, they're trying to turn it into what? Like just capitalist, oppressive.
Well, this is what I got trained to do when I was in grad school. As I was just saying, like everything's just training of a style. Like the same way he picked up on the Dan Maclellan style, those kids are picking up on a literary criticism style, and it's all just passed down. It's like the new, it's religious inculcation on how to interpret things.
What I want to do is I want to use this as a jumping off place to explain actually what Paulo Freire did, what he actually gave to the world as far as to the Marxists of the world. And what he did was he gave people the ability to create the woke condition. And what the woke condition is that you have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of Marxist activists who don't know a thing about Marxist theory. They don't know Marx. They don't know Marcuse. They don't know Lukács. They don't know Horkheimer. They don't know who these people are. They don't know who Freire is. They don't know a word of what these people wrote. They don't have the slightest idea what they're doing Marxist activism. And the reason that they were able to do that is because of what Paulo Freire did to transform the way that Marxist critique is done. And, if I had time and I was digging it up, I would find for you and play through my phone an episode of a documentary, or sorry, not a documentary, an interview show from the 70s with Herbert Marcuse. And he's sitting down in this interview show. I don't remember if it's in German or English, but he's complaining that the movement that he kind of spawned, this critical movement, had become vigorously anti-intellectual. And this is by like 1976, already vigorously anti-intellectual. Now, this is before Paulo Freire's work really busts onto the scene, so we can't give Freire all the credit. So we have to blame Marcuse somewhat as well. And Marcuse's idea of relentless negative thinking, a relentless critique of everything that exists to induce a great refusal, and to bring the critical theory to the masses, turned out to be a really stupid idea. And it turns out what they did was they Marcuse and Freire, being the they here, they created mechanisms by which Marxist critique can be engaged in by lay people who don't know a damn thing. They don't know any Marxist theory. They don't know the objectives. All they know is how to tear down everything that exists. Ruthless criticism of all that exists, per Karl Marx, decentralized and put in the hands of idiots. And these idiots are able to get PhDs. So this is an important part of the story, that there are incentive structures for these idiots that have been built into the universities thanks to the long march through the institutions that was initiated largely by Herbert Marcuse in the United States. Ditching the word gardening because gardening is problematic is a possible foundation for, guess what, a PhD thesis. You could write just as easily as you could get something published in whatever. I don't see on this article, the screenshot of it, I don't see what it was published in, but it could be in Teen Vogue, it could be in Vice, it could be in Vox. You want to write for any of these shitty left-wing journalistic outlets, it's as easy as pie.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know. It's just cherry picking. It's so obvious cherry picking and unapologetically cherry picking.
Yeah, I'm looking over.
Of course, you can go through history and you can find the little data points you need to make the story you want to tell. But that's not honest or appropriate in any way whatsoever. So,
but different parts of the film that keep popping up into my head that they just left out, like the part where
the Winter Soldier? That's the one I've heard that was good. I've heard that if there's one of those movies I should watch, it was good.
Winter Soldier is my favorite out of the three. Yeah, that's the second one.
Oh, I didn't even know there was three. I'm so out of this.
The three Captain Americas are pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, but my favorite one was 2, Winter Soldier. It was good.
I just know the Red Letter Media guys were pretty gushing about Winter Soldier, and it seemed to be the only one that they thought was a good movie on its own right.
That was probably my favorite. That was probably my favorite of all the Marvel movies that I've seen. But in the first one, like there's this part where the guy wants to choose him, and he's this skinny dork, but the drill sergeant doesn't want him to choose the skinny dork, so he's like, "Why would you choose him?" And he's like, "I'll show you that he's just a coward." He he takes, it's a dummy grenade, but everybody thinks it's a live grenade. Pulls the pin, throws it, and says live grenade, and everybody runs. But then scrawny little Steve Rogers like takes his helmet and jumps on top of it to try to protect people. I'm like, how do you? So you take that part. That part alone seems like that's enough to be like, oh yeah, he doesn't fit under all cops are bastard. He tried to sacrifice his life to save these people who hate him, and then even later on he does sacrifice his life to save his country. Like this is the worst one you could possibly choose to call a bastard.
I guess, but I mean, even just at the very beginning of the whole thing, though, all cops are bastards. Like, it's like saying, you know, like all politicians are lizard people. Like, you're just what a stupid thing to say.
Well, it's all.
Of course, they're very obviously not. It's really obvious that there's lots of very good cops.
The flip end, and this is kind of like the twist of Dan Maclellan too, is that the person defending him is going to try to defend him by saying, no, it's actually good and leftist, which is basically what Dan Maclellan kind of does for Mormonism.
Yeah,
like, hey, Mormonism. Stop trying to criticize us, not because you're just wrong, because you are just wrong, and I'll trample you for it. But I'm actually good and leftist. I'm good and leftist too. And that,
queer theory and the Old Testament are totally. There's no. It's fine.
Yeah.
Steve chose to use an existing infrastructure and system that had institutional authority during an emergency. It's curious.
He is also a true image of America as the world's police, since his weapon of choice is actually a shield, wearing a mask as a global defender while using a tool of defense to bash in the skulls of those who oppose his ideal.
It's worth noting here that Steve Rogers is already a public figure, so wearing the mask is more about pragmatics than actually obscuring an identity. But let's talk about the rhetoric of the shield.
Tell me that's not Dan Maclellan.
Yes.
The rhetoric of the shield.
This was just a rhetorical tool.
Rhetoric.
This was just a rhetorical tool.
Rhetoric of the shield.
To aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics.
Rhetoric of the shield.
This was just a rhetorical tool.
Every weapon has a visual message that it sends, and the shield is no different. And while it does have...
Is he going to get into semiotics, symbology and semiotics and signifiers and signifieds? I bet you it's in his dissertation.
Of offensive capabilities, that's not its primary intended use. Its primary use is that of defense. The rhetorical messaging here is that violence is only used when necessary as a matter of defense, as opposed to, say, a suit of armor that fires projectiles, which is purely offensive in nature.
He rated Phase 1 MCU Captain America a cabaret, harkening back to his brief career on stage. If you disagree, get in the comments. Tune in next time when we tackle Phase 2 MCU Captain America, aka the Deconstruction Era.
Oh, Christ.
The deconstruction.
So those two guys are real. Like, 'cause that's the other thing is like,
yeah,
like,
this is
like
all real.
Poe.
Everything's
they're
real.
like a Poe. Like I would almost imagine Ryan Long and that guy doing one of these.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, because they really look like that. That's
Here's
like,
why Captain America is a Nazi.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's just funny because like, and the great irony is like, you know, like, what does a communist revolutionary look like? There they are.
Yeah. That's why you know it's not Poe.
Those guys definitely have some pictures of them, like some selfies of them going.
Yeah, doing the big mouth smile. Yeah.
So my distasteful puns notwithstanding, I'd give you about a D+ on this, and here's why. Your thesis statement was not well supported. Your evidence was
Thanks, Professor.
A little bit tenuous. And
the thing is, like, I disagree with those guys totally, but like him grading it like a professor paper, like, budge off.
Your speculation and your conclusions were a bit outside of the realm of plausibility. So it's not that I thought they were completely wrong readings. I just didn't think that they were the best readings of the text.
No, they were completely wrong. They were absolutely
pretty
completely 100% wrong.
Yeah, so I'll pull it up for you here.
I don't even know what to say to that. It was like an absurd.
I'll show you. I put a comment on it. I'll show you what I said to it. Hold on a second here. I gotta pull up the screen.
I can't get over that this guy is a professor of comic books.
Dude, there's that stuff was already all there when I was there and 15 years ago. I remember I read a dissertation on The Simpsons and a dissertation on South Park. I read it, and but they have to put the framing of the leftist world framing critical theory into it, and then you can talk about anything or be an expert about anything if you do a dialectic of the Enlightenment reading of critical theory.
You can be an expert at comics.
You don't have to understand anything about Marxist theory to be an activist. You don't have to have ever read a word of it. So when people say, James, do you really think these people are Marxists? They've never read Marx. They don't even know who he is. Yes, I do. Because they only have to have two things. You only have to have critical consciousness and to engage in what Freire refers to as critical denunciation. That's all you have to have. That's it. All you have to do is be able to orient your critique in a particular way and then to engage in it relentlessly through denunciation. You don't have to have a single positive vision for the world at all. In fact, both Marcuse and Freire agree that that's bad. In fact, it's right wing. You'll impose your vision on the world. So you only need two things to be one of these people. A woke critic is what these people are, which is a Marxist, even though they don't know that they're Marxists. You only need two things to be one of these people. Number one, you need to have been programmed to see hidden dehumanizing structures or dehumanizing structural elements in everything.
This was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics.
You have to have been brainwashed to see things in terms of dehumanizing structures. That is, you have to see the world through a lens of Marxist critique. When we look at Robert J. Lifton's Psychology of Thought Reform that he wrote about, this is what in the Chinese communist context was called, and under Mao, was called learning to see from the people's standpoint. This is what Paulo Freire calls the pedagogy of the oppressed. You're learning to see the world as though it is composed of structural elements that dehumanize certain groups or certain people. And so the first thing you have to do is be brainwashed or programmed to see the world that way. And the second thing you have to have is to know how to engage in a so-called critique of those things. In other words, you have to know how to denounce those things from a position of critical consciousness, which Paulo Freire says automatically announces the possibility of a new and different world.
So I'm not even saying you can't, because I've known people.
No, you
I've known
can't.
guys that work in
You
comic
can't.
shops, and I've asked them, like, I've just asked them any question about any character, and they know it, and they tell me, and it's always very interesting because I don't know quite as much about comics. But like the fact that there is a university courses where you can earn a degree in comic books.
Yes, but this is what I'm telling you is you can't be an expert in the comics just by being an expert in the comics and get a degree in it. You have to be an expert critical theorist in the comics. Does that? And that's why I'm saying like
about this is that because you said it doesn't bother me in principle that you could get a degree in comics. Like if we were talking about like a classical education that the Monty Python guys got, that's one of the things that I lament so much is that because that Monty Python show was so brilliant, and it's like all those jokes about Latin and philosophy and the ancient Greeks and all that stuff. They learned that at university. Well, they they did a whole joke about Latin grammar. It's because they learned classical Latin, and that's where they got that material from. And you just look at people that come out of college today and know nothing. Like this guy, all he's doing is the academic game. This thing where it's like, well, you're not wrong, but that's a D-. Like, so that's basically, I mean, really, like, if you're going into college, watch this guy. He'll give you good advice.
That's how you get good.
The game.
That's how you get good grades in college. You repeat it and you dissect it like that, not like how
and you satisfy their requirements. Because again, like your final conclusions, I mean, in critical theory, obviously you have to have the right conclusions. But like, as long as you're using the language and hitting their points.
All you have to do, if you want to destroy a church, a religion, a society, a country, entire civilization, Western civilization comprising many countries stretching across many centuries, all you have to do is generate a generation or two of people, tens of thousands of them, who know how to do this, and then create reward systems or incentive structures that incentivize them to do that, say like getting a PhD in this kind of critique. All you have to know how to do is complain in a particular way by seeing so-called structural power.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics.
That is oppressive and dehumanizing and everything, and then complaining about it in that specific way. All you need is an incentive structure. All you need is an incentive structure that creates lots of these people, PhDs, tenure-track job positions, book deals, journalist publication jobs, opinion writers. All you need is an incentive structure that rewards these people. And eventually it'll trickle down to where that's what cool people do. People who aren't criticizing in the public society are people who are willfully ignorant and willfully blind.
But that's just it. It's like guys who go and get impressed watching Dan McClellan If you've gone through those schools and all that sorts of stuff, you just say, oh, you're just a bot made from the school. You see it in 2 seconds. You don't get impressed in any way, shape, or form. And that's what I've been saying for years in the ex-Mormon scene. And I don't even know that they have degrees or anything, but I'd see like Lindsay Hansen Park start talking about something, and she just start going. I'm like, Foucault. Nobody knows this is Foucault. You're doing Foucault, and everybody and John DeLynn will stop and go, "This is so brilliant. This is so brilliant." And I'm like, no, this is what you are trained. This is the bot you are trained to be, and it's the most cliche, old, boring thing in the world from universities right now. But everybody comes across it in the wild, and they're like, I'm dealing with real brain here. Oh my gosh.
So the recipe is very simple. It's very, very simple. The people who consider themselves to be experts in whatever are actually not experts in that thing, but they are self-appointed gatekeepers of that domain of thought. They are self-appointed gatekeepers of that domain of thought because they are the self-appointed deciders of what constitutes legitimate knowledge in that domain and what does not. So they include their ways of knowing and exclude other ways of knowing. They include what they consider knowledge and they exclude what other people consider knowledge. They consider education the process of bringing people into the correct forms of knowing and knowledges, and thus the uneducated have the incorrect forms of knowing and knowledges. So the other people who have different ways of knowing about whatever that domain of thought happens to be, and who have different ways, different knowledges about that domain of thought, are excluded, which is a form of oppression. They are moved to the margins of that domain of thought. They are marginalized. So let's look at this in terms of gardening, why we might have to, I didn't read the article about why we have to ditch the term gardening. It doesn't even matter what these people are writing. It's all just words spun around this concept. And what I'm going to do is actually go through a few different domains of thought and give you this picture. So the recipe is very, very simple. People who call themselves gardeners are actually self-appointed gatekeepers of gardening knowledge. And that gardening knowledge that they deem official and correct excludes other ways of knowing about gardening, and thus excludes other ways of gardening and the people who engage in other ways of knowing about gardening and other gardening systems of gardening or programs of gardening or thinking about gardening. And so people who garden in different ways are excluded, and that forms a system of oppression that excludes those people. All you have to do is hang it on to any one of these so-called beams of structural oppression, and now you're off to the races. Gardening is racist because the knowledges in it don't include black ways of gardening. Gardening is homophobic because it doesn't include queer ways of gardening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have transplants, and so transplant. And you could play in that pun. I was making a joke, but you really could play in that pun all day long. As soon as I say it, I realize it. So it's transphobic because we don't have transplants and we don't have trans ways of gardening. So what you create is a system of oppression with regard to what it means to know how to garden and thus to be a gardener. And so gardener is no longer a designation that means anything except that it is a gate-kept status symbol for the people who consider themselves gardeners. And the things that they know are the tools that they use to exclude other ways of gardening, other ways of thinking about gardening, and other people who might garden differently from what's called gardening. And so we have to critique that term gardening. We might have to get rid of the term gardening because it may have some racist history or sexist history or who the hell knows what history. And so ultimately, what you have to do to denounce and denounce it is you denounce how it creates this dehumanization through this tortured argument that is of the exact same form every single time. And then you say, we're going to fix that by the announcing of a new possibility, the denouncing in order to announce from a critical perspective. You denounce it for creating a marginalizing, dehumanizing structure. And then you announce a new way of being by saying, so we're going to change that. In fact, it needs to change. We demand that it changes by letting in other ways of knowing about gardening and thus the people who garden in other ways. And this literally can be repeated any way you want in any domain you want. Take out gardening, put in anything else you want, and you have it. We all know that being outside, outdoorsmanship is apparently white. It's too white. We all know this. What I say is we all know that the critical race theory decentralized critiquers say this, that they've written articles being outside, going jogging, it doesn't matter what it is. So we'll say outdoorsmanship, but we'll include all outdoor activities. This is apparently racist. It's probably anti-gay, and it's certainly patriarchal in one way or another. All you have to do is pick. The only creative part is figuring out how to create the hanger to hang it on to whichever structure of power.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics,
Systemic racism, systemic patriarchy, systemic homophobia, systemic transphobia, systemic classism, systemic ableism, whichever, you just pick one of those or more than one of those if you want to be intersectional. Figure out how to manufacture the clothes hanger, and they give you a PhD for this bullshit. So there are people who consider themselves outdoorsmen or outdoors people or whatever, and they actually don't know anything about being outdoors. They are actually self-appointed gatekeepers of outdoors relevant knowledge. And that excludes other ways of knowing about what it means to be outdoors. And it creates a hegemonic system of outdoorsmanship that excludes certain people and other ways of knowing about what it is to be outside, whether it's camping, whether it's running, whether it's jogging, whatever it is. Fishing, doesn't matter. Other people with other ways of knowing about being outside are excluded. And then what this does is it creates actually a hegemonic pattern where most of the people doing it are in a particular identity group or whatever else. And thus, people who aren't in that identity group feel like it's not for them. And so there's a system of exclusion, a system of oppressive power.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics,
that keeps them out of it. So it needs to be critiqued. And in the end, this needs to be changed by letting in other ways of knowing about outdoorsmanship or outdoor activities and letting other people participate in them on their own terms in ways by excluding, in fact, the people who are already doing it, where they're going to be allowed to feel comfortable under the definition of inclusion, which means that they don't run into anything that would bother them according to their belief that everything is made out of dehumanizing structural power.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics.
By the way, this is literally the whole woke recipe. This is it. And again, if all you have to do is give people jobs or advanced degrees and tenure track positions and book deals for being able to apply this to a new concept or in a new domain, and you've got the incentive structure that will destroy society. And critique is just the process of redefining the words that are relevant to be used so that they are understood in terms of those power dynamics.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics.
Let's do another one. It doesn't matter what it is. Librarianship, running a library. Just pulled this out of the air because I looked at my bookshelf and see a bunch of books. I didn't even plan ahead which ones I'm going to pick. Didn't think it through ahead. We're winging it as we go. There are people who consider themselves librarians, but they in fact are self-appointed gatekeepers of library knowledge, of library science. They've created the field of library science to justify their own position as librarians and to exclude other people from being librarians. They have all of this knowledge. It's like a barrier to entry into becoming a librarian, and they use that to exclude other ways of knowing about library organization and library management, other ways of thinking about what the job of a librarian is. Perhaps, maybe they think that a librarian's job is not to be an activist, and you have to let in other ways of being a librarian, because otherwise it's a structure of power. It is a systemic power dynamic.
But this was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics,
that excludes certain people from being librarians while allowing certain credentialed people who have bought into the bourgeois system, the bourgeois values of librarianship, library science, or whatever the hell it's called, allows them to be librarians, but not other people with different thoughts about how to be librarians, like maybe organizing books completely differently, or not organizing them, or having them all in piles on the floor, or maybe using library time to be activists, or that libraries are actually just public spaces where you bring in drag queens or something like this. So library science as a field of knowledge excludes people who think differently about librarianship, about library science. And that needs to change by letting in other ways of knowing about libraries, other knowledges about librarian activities, including activism. And we have to bring in the people who think differently about how libraries should be organized and put into service. It's exactly the same thing. That's literally an entire domain within library science now. In fact, it's taken over the American Library Association. So as long as we're talking about big associations, let's try another one. Let's go for medicine, because what could go wrong if, say, they polluted medicine with other ways of knowing? What could possibly go wrong? I've done podcasts on medical lysenkoism. I go around the country advising young people who are thinking about going into law school to major or prepare for medical malpractice law, for a variety of reasons that don't actually need to be stated. Let's just do it again. People who consider themselves medical professionals or medical experts or doctors or nurses or radiologists or whatever, doesn't matter. Anesthesiologists, why not? Why not? Let's just use the access to our consciousness where we might die if it goes wrong even a little bit. It's just whatever. People who consider themselves medical professionals in any domain of medicine are actually not medical professionals at all. They are self-appointed gatekeepers of medical knowledge. That excludes other ways of knowing about medicine, about health. Thus, it excludes other ways of doing medicine, of practicing medicine, of being a doctor. And in fact, maybe other medical systems entirely, like ones that are based off of creating equitable outcomes.
A more equitable vision of America that has not yet been realized.
Instead of, say, a principle of doing no harm. And so people who have different thoughts about how to practice medicine, whether that's maybe Chinese medicine, whether that's indigenous medicine, whether that's random, snake oil guy that's made up some system and put it on the internet, but of course it wouldn't be that. What it's definitely going to be is people who are using it in an activist sense to create equity.
A more equitable vision of America that has not yet been realized.
It's going to be inclusive medicine in some sense or another. Those people are excluded. Maybe, and this is all you got to do is figure out how to put this on a hanger and connect it to racism, sexism, or whatever. Doesn't matter. Racism in particular is basically the New England Journal of Medicine now, saying that medicine is intrinsically racist and racist everything to do with health outcomes. So we have to rethink medical knowledge entirely to account for those and to be more equitable.
A more equitable vision of America that has not yet been realized.
This is literally the leading medical journals in the world are writing this. By the way, from what I understand, Boston Medical Journal is the only one that's not all the way down this road among the biggest ones. The Lancet, Cell, New England Journal of Medicine, especially, all the way down this road, all the way in. They figured out how to build the hanger, or some activist doctors did, and this is all they write about, and this is all that gets published because, well, you have to just kind of conform to this thing or you're a racist. The extortion racket works.
But maybe there's something for like the classical education to learn from this, that maybe they should have had, when it was classical education, somebody who's good enough to catalog comic writing or something like that in a truthful way, not an activistic way. But for years they were kind of just gatekeepers on like, oh, it's not highbrow enough or something like that. So then activists say, oh no, you can do your bullshit here as long as you put the activism in it. And that's half of the story of the way the university has gone to print.
There really is the problem. Is like there's at this point there's no not being an activist, right? In the humanities, like, is there any?
No, you basically have to do that. Yeah, if you want to get to the paper,
you got to at least play the game to get the degree. But like there's no. I mean, is anybody running one of those departments that is doing Monty Python style classical education?
I think because when I was there, I remember we were kind of separated from the Russians. And we're like, why aren't we hanging out with the Russians anymore? Like, and I don't mean Russians, like the people reading the Russian. And it seemed like over in the Russian department that they were kind of doing classical literature style. I don't know that that's true now, but one of the things is like, if you go get like a PhD or a master's thesis or something like that, you have to get like a board of people who approve and do your PhD with you. And you can read all sorts of stories online of people trying to do it and going through a nightmare and hell doing it because you just can't find somebody who will pass you through, because it's all dependent on this kind of peer professor necessity of having who is on your board that passes you through. Meanwhile,
and if they have a purity test that you don't meet, they can just hold you up forever.
They'll send you back to rewrites, and they won't be specific about what you're supposed to rewrite when they're really kind of hinting that the way you're supposed to rewrite is you're supposed to see the world as I see.
Oh, wait, I get it. I understand. Getting a PhD is like getting a rating from the MPAA.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to Trey Parker and Matt Stone talk about? Yeah, and that's one of the things they talk about. Is that, where they said, like, that's one thing they talked about is how just how screwed up it is that when they were independent filmmakers, they would just get it back saying like, nope. And they say like, well, can you tell us what? And they're like, no, we're not allowed to tell you what.
Yeah.
You just have to send us another cut. And then, but once they were working for like one of the big boys, they described like they got a call and they're like, change this to this, this to this, this to this, and you're fine.
That's exactly it.
So,
and unless you're able to get, I don't know what they call it, like the committee, I forget what the word is, but unless you're able to get some that are going to be on your side and pass you well enough through, you're going to have to regurgitate some sort of activism. This is why that speech by Haight is so good. Jonathan Streeter reposted a bunch of it on his channel of when the university split off from truth to activism, they're two different things. And we're even seeing it right there. Both of those people talk are activists, the Critique and the original guys, the activists. Like none of them were just truth. And there's the one who went through the graduate school did a little bit more truth stuff. but he still had to weave in activistic stuff like Dan McClellan does. And look at this. Somebody commented on that one, said, Dan McClellan for comics, I dig it. And then
I
he
assumed
answers,
that was you. I didn't.
No, the creator answers it. I fear the day McClellan starts making comics content. I don't need the competition. So obviously he knows what exactly he's doing. But I think it would easily become a archetype or a type on TikTok of these types of dipshits going in there and setting all the kids straight with their academic activism. This is what I commented. God, I can't stand Dan McClellan. And that's all I put on there because he knows exactly what he's doing. I mean, even if I'd even like it better if he said all the same words and for some reason he wasn't. Everything on the internet and all that stuff has such, it's so mimetic. Like everybody starts copying what the other person did and acting like he's acting like Dan McClellan there. Exactly. I guess because it works.
This was just a rhetorical tool to aid in the structuring of power and values in the service of their identity politics, which is exactly how this creator is deploying it today.